A very good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm just letting a few more people in and we can start. Hi, Anita. Hello, Keval. I'm just saying hi to the people I can see, but very nice to have you all in the room today. All right. Okay, so I guess let's begin dot on time. We don't have too much time today, but would like to start a little bit about myself. My name is Sharon Weir, and I'm part of Fourth Wheel. We're a boutique consulting firm which focuses on impact strategy, measurement, monitoring systems, and impact studies. We've been having the social impact dialogues since the last year. We started off last year, and we've had very, very interesting people talk to us about the actual real pressing problems in the sector. And most importantly, not just the problems, but solutions. How do we actually take things forward, implement in our organizations? So I'm going to stop here and introduce Rohit, who's representing Tech4Dev today. I've already seen his slide deck, looks very interesting. But yes, over to you, Rohit, if you want to introduce yourself and the topic which we are all here for today, which is open source.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for having me. And my name is Rohit Chatterjee. I work for Project Tech4Dev, which I'll describe in a few minutes. I'm the director of engineering over here, and I've been working in the social sector for 3 or 4 years now. Before this, it was with fundraising, and now it's more, with what Project Tech4Dev does. Today, we're going to be talking about open source software. We're going to be talking about what open source software means for the social sector, but also things which are not necessarily unique to the social sector, because sometimes one gets the impression that many problems are unique to the work that one does, but it turns out that these things are actually more widespread. And by problems, I should really say challenges, because these are not things that can't be overcome. So I'm going to start with setting some context and what is open source software. So the easy definition is open source software is software whose source code is freely available. That means you can see it, which usually is not relevant to most of us, because unless you're reading the code and writing code, you don't really care. But there are implications of this. The first one being that if it's available, then the way of working with it is tends to be very collaborative. If you're a developer, you can of course contribute more source code, and you can extend and add modules and stuff. But in addition to contributing code, there are open source projects solicit and accept contributions in terms of design, documentation, health videos, and things which are not necessarily pure computer science. Sharon, let's move over to the next slide. And another big difference between running open source software and traditional closed source software is that in open source projects, the team's roadmap tends to be published and is on their website or on their Docusaurus or on their GitHub. And so you can see kind of which features are going to be made available when. Very often, many teams will ask the community of their users and potential users for input on how to prioritize the rollout of these features. And so it's not like you can always ask for something to be built for you, but you can always put in a proposal and people will vote on it. And it's, that way you can have some kind of input into the shape of the product you're using. Other than that, of course, because the code is available, it means you can run it yourself if you have the expertise, if you have a team that does it. Many tools will have a company behind the project which offers it as a regular SaaS offering. So in these cases, you don't really care that the code is available, although I'll talk about why that might still be important. So if you use a tool such as like your Kobo toolbox, the code is available, but you'll go for the hosted version. Some of them are free, like Kobo. Some of them are paid, like Comcare. So it's not necessarily true that open source software means that a hosted offering is free, but it is always true that if you have the wherewithal, then you can download it and run it yourself. Or you can find somebody who will run it for you. I remember a few years ago, I'd have clients who would have hired a vendor to run a certain software for them on their servers, and then the vendor shut shop, but they decide to do something else, and then the client would have kind of been stuck. Vendors have wised up, and now many vendors will suggest that they run the software on the client's infrastructure, which means the client will provision a server, hard disk, and whatever they need, and the vendor will just set it up over there. So if the vendor goes out of business, the programs are still running, the data is there, and the client then just needs to find a new vendor, and fingers crossed they do. In the case, of course, that they don't do it, and if the vendor is the one who's running it on their infra, then at handover time, the client needs to make sure they get all the configurations, all the data, so that they can set up a new instance on their own. Okay, let's move, Sharon. So we did a poll, and we got a lot of responses. Thank you all for that. Let me just, you may remember the questions which you were asked in this poll. Let me give you some high level insights of what we got. So data collection, the options were what, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and we didn't see any particular spike on any one of those. It really varied. It was very uniform. There were many organizations who collected daily, which I expected, and weekly, but there were also a lot of monthly and quarterly. So it's not true that every data system needs to have frequent data collection. It turns out that that's quite spread out. There were a lot of course, online form collection tools used, but there were a lot of orgs who were still using paper. This is also confirmed by our experience at Project Tech4Dev. We have clients who use paper forms and then have to get the responses from the paper forms into a computer system. Google Forms is, of course, very popular, as are tools like Kobo and Avni and Comcare. Reporting, there were many of you who used Tableau, Power BI, and probably others which were not on the questionnaire. But Excel is still everyone's favorite, and that's because it's the best program ever written. Excel does everything. So Excel is super popular, and in the Q&A, if anybody's interested, we can talk about pros and cons of using Excel for larger systems. Reports were generated both by specialized data analysts as well as M&E people who are not necessarily, people whose primary responsibility is not reporting, but they're still able to do it and do it. So that's good, because it means that the tools have gotten, friendly enough to users that non-specialists can do this work. Most of you used internally managed tools, which might mean you're running it, or it might just mean that it's a SaaS program, but you'll run it yourselves. So internally managed tools, sure. Report generation, mostly monthly and quarterly. That makes sense. You need to do your monthly reports and your quarterly reports. I was a little surprised that there weren't also many weekly reports, but of course, different people work in different ways. I expect that, as things progress and as an org grows, you will probably move to more frequent reporting, not to replace, but in addition to your monthly and quarterly reports, to your donors and your other stakeholders. And finally, one thing which came out of the questionnaire, which was very heartening to see, was that setting up data pipelines. I think we asked the question in terms of managing and combining multiple data sources. This was not as huge of a problem as it probably was a few years ago. So many of you did it by yourselves and did it within a few months. And so that's really good to hear. Okay, let's move. Let me just tell you guys.
Sorry, Rohit, just to kind of build on that, I think even during the question answer, it would be really nice to hear, more on how they set it up so quickly. But sorry, yes, please go ahead.
Absolutely, yes. So now I'm just going to complete my introduction. What does Project Tech4Dev do? Well, we have 2 software platforms and we have a consulting service. The 2 software platforms are Glific, which is a WhatsApp chatbot generator. So you can build chatbots and put them out on WhatsApp. And your beneficiaries will typically write in and the chatbot will respond. So you can define programmatic flows. Okay, if the user says hello, then you say, how are you, whatever. The second one is Dalgo, which is the data platform, which is what I work on. And Dalgo lets you pull in data from multiple disparate data sources into a central data warehouse. Data warehouse just means a bunch of tables, many tables potentially. And inside the warehouse, you will clean up your data, you will join your data, you will deduplicate your data, and do many things, the many things which you need to do to get it ready for reporting. And Dalgo helps you orchestrate all of that. Set it on a schedule. You need something pulled in on Sundays. You need something pulled in every day. You need to run transformations. You need to make sure your tests are passing. You need to generate reports on test coverage. Dalgo lets you do things like that. Finally, we have a consulting program called the Fractional CXO program. Fractional because it's not a full-time engagement. Typically, it's, I think, 30 to 50%. Where a senior tech person is embedded into an organization and solves whatever tech problems the org needs. They might be exciting or they might be mundane, but whatever the org needs, the fractional CXO will work towards. Sharon, you're muted.
Sorry. I said thank you so much for that introduction, Rohit. I hope people could resonate with some things that we spoke about. Definitely the poll results, and what we're here today for is to look at how organizations have incorporated open source or used open source softwares, and then what it means in terms of solutions for you all to actually take this up within your organizations or to reflect on your organizational practices. So Rohit would also like you to now build on a couple of success stories where tech has played a big role, where open source software has resulted in more streamlined data collection, analysis, visualization, and most importantly, decision-making based on evidence. So over to you, Rohit.
Absolutely. So I spoke with a couple of my colleagues and I got a few case studies to relay over to the audience. So this first one is from Sneha, who works out of Mumbai, and they wanted to set up, so they had a POC, which somebody like an intern had put together to track a certain healthcare program. And so they put it together and then it grew, and as POCs do, it was no longer a POC and it became a production system, but it hadn't really been built or architected to be a production system. And people left and people came in and the code was very hard to read. And so at some point they said that they need to transition to like a real platform. So we explored a few different options. The most popular HMS in this space, open source HMS in this space, is something called Avni. So our fractional CXO looked at that, and there were pros and cons. And then he looked at something called OpenEMR. I'm not familiar with what either of these did, but there were pros and cons there. And then finally, he settled on something called Frappe Healthcare. So Frappe Healthcare is an application built on top of Frappe, which many of you are familiar with. And he chose it because it was customizable. I'm sure all of them were customizable, but this was the easiest to customize to what Sneha's needs were. But Frappe Healthcare was not managed by the regular Frappe team. It was kind of an offshoot. And so there was a small team of, I think, 5 people who were running it out of a small company in Kerala. And it turned out, and I'm pointing this out as, there's a pros and cons to open source, right? So it turned out that during this implementation, the project lead for Frappe Healthcare got sick. Not terribly sick, he's fine, but he got sick, and because of that dependency on a single person, the project actually got delayed. So this is something which, when you're choosing your solution, you might want to find out who is the team who is backing the software, because some tools have huge companies behind them, some have mid-sized teams, and some of them have really small 3 or 4 people who support the product. In the end, okay, this gentleman got better, and they managed to implement the thing. But this is I bring up this story because this is typically not a story you'll hear if you're going with a full commercial solution, that one person got sick and therefore we had to wait an extra month.
Well, I'll just move on to the next slide, Rohit. But just to clarify, so POC means plan of action, or
a POC, Sharon, is a proof of concept.
proof of
So
concept?
they wanted a little toy program just to test an idea, and they put it together. And then the idea having been tested, they decided to put it into production without, it's like taking a toy car and putting it on the street. You can't
Sure.
really do that.
They had a set of indicators which they then wanted to digitize and bring onto the platform. Is just for people joining the conversation a little, just for who are just getting oriented to open source. Okay, great.
Yes, so there was a website, and data was put in, and it went into a database, and reports were made, and all that was beautiful. It just couldn't handle the scale as more and more people came on, and as Sneha started, leading on it more and more heavily, it couldn't keep up, and the server would crash, and updating a report would take 3 days because somebody had to go and find out that one line of code which had to be updated. It wasn't maintainable.
Got it. Sure.
My second use case, which is also with Sneha, is the implementation of Dalgo. Dalgo is Project Tech4Dev's data platform, for those of you who joined after my intro. And this is a good story because it's been a success, and it's we are very happy. Sneha is very happy. Before Dalgo was implemented, they had multiple tools for data collection. Sneha sells field workers out, and they gather information, pregnant women, postnatal women, children, and they collect a lot of stuff, and it's in a different tools and different databases, and so each one has its own report, and it's very hard to see connections between reports, generated by these different pieces of software. Report updates were done manually, so the team would go and sit and click buttons, on a weekly basis and update them. And because computers are frustrating, it doesn't work, and then you have to go and click more buttons, and nothing happens. And as Sneha has grown and added people, they really wanted different people to see different things based on their job description. And a system which is not built for that just can't do that. You just, you share a link and that person sees everything, which is sometimes okay, but sometimes you don't want it. So they moved over to the Dalgo data platform. And just in terms of timing, this was done while Dalgo was being built. So we started with a proof of concept to test various pieces that would eventually get into the platform. We started putting it together for them. And as we built the platform up on one side, we pushed those pieces out to Sneha's implementation. And so this took a while. It may not have taken as long as it did if the platform had been ready from the start, but because we were building it while they were implementing it, it took almost a year. Now, I'm not saying it would have taken a month or two if the platform had been ready, because the vast majority of the work was in getting all the data cleaned up, aligned in one place. They have a couple hundred tables with SQL code generating them, and there's a whole pipeline of, okay, the stuff comes in, and then you do some SQL, and you get another table, and then you join it, and you get another table. And so it was a large project, and our fractional CXO visited with them, with the Sneha team, and had regular meetings with people up and down the organization to really figure out who needs what and when, who needs access to what. We implemented the role-based access. We implemented the regular updates. And suddenly there was a part when they switched over one of the source programs, and we had to set up the pipeline to pull in historical data separately from the new data. And so this took a while, but now that it's up and running, it runs pretty well. The entire pipeline takes, I think, about an hour, maybe 75 minutes per night, every night, but it runs smoothly. The tables are updated, the reports are updated. People see what they need to see and not what they are not supposed to see. And we're increasing our SQL test coverage which gives the client confidence that the SQL is doing what it's supposed to do. And okay, I put in so it is true, because the Dalgo is open source and the components that we use are open source. If Tech4Dev for some reason goes belly up, or we just decide that we're not doing this anymore, which we're not going to do, but I mean, if in the hypothetical situation, Sneha would be okay, because they could take everything and run it themselves. All the data is on their infra, in their databases. They would just have to take the program, which is some Docker images, and they run them on their own servers, and they could just continue. I mean, it might not be overnight, but it would certainly be in less than a week. So that's probably a big plus for them. My third case story, so this is much shorter, but so Avni is another data collection tool. And I brought this one up because this was for a government client. This was a classroom observation tool for Andhra Pradesh, and the government requirements were that it run not on Avni's regular servers, where Avni runs things. So they wanted their own servers, and their own servers could not connect, or they didn't want to rely on the AWS authentication service. So Avni found an open source replacement called Keycloak. They didn't want to use AWS's S3 storage service. So Avni found an open source replacement called Minio, and things just worked. So this is a great story because sometimes, an organization has certain requirements which are kind of non-negotiable, and it's not necessarily obvious that that a vendor will be able to satisfy them. But this worked just fine. Avni ran a pilot on separate infra, and then eventually, when everything was approved, they transferred it over to whatever AP government servers were available, and it's been white labeled, and they run it, and it's a success story. They put up a blog to which I've linked at the top of this slide, and they're very proud of that.
And we can share this with a couple of people that also written in the chat about, what are these different examples. So maybe we can also come up with a quick list after this call and share it with all of you who've joined today, as well as this link for a success story. So we'll be doing that. Fourth Wheel team, please take note and we'll send it out. All right. So thank you, Rohit. I think there are definitely success stories and also, like you pointed out, a lot of the challenges. But I think now let's address, what it takes to actually start this journey, right? How to begin? What do we need to have in place? And what is your advice to organizations here today in terms of adoption of open source?
Absolutely. So the first thing to note is that open source isn't free. If you run it, even if you run it yourself, you might not have to pay a license, but you're still going to have to pay for things. The obvious things are that you pay for machines, but also you'll need to pay for people if you run it yourself. Because there are some tools like like Metabase, which are just so easy to run. You download it and you double click a jar file and it's just up. But then some things are much harder to run, and you need somebody who you really need a DevOps person who knows how to set up software, set up network stuff and storage stuff, and it can be a bit of a project. And that includes if you want to run Dalgo. So Dalgo is open source, but it's not the easiest thing to set up on its own. We've made it easier, but it's not easy. It's not like a double click and the thing opens up. So when you're making this decision, you definitely want to figure out who can help. You want to make sure there's more than one vendor. There should be a few. You want to make sure that they do these projects often and they haven't just put it on their website, because you want to, they should have experience and recent experience. You want to make it's also nice to have an online community. So if you can find an online forum where users are coming and asking questions and answering questions, it helps if there are YouTubers who are putting up tutorial videos. These are good indications that this is software which people know about and which is actively maintained and actively used. And if you have problems one day, there will be people out there who you can find and go to for help. That Frappe healthcare tool was that example where the team was there, but there wasn't a huge support ecosystem. I'm hoping it's getting better now. This next slide, primary challenges, this is from the poll. So many of you did not have challenges, which was great. But the ones who did, if we just look through this list, planning, missing data, incorrect data entry, there's nothing here which is really specific to the social sector. And this is a good thing, because this means that the challenges of open source adoption are things which are well known, even to SMEs and government. You still need to plan your project. You need to plan your migration. You need to know what it is that you're aiming for. You need to make sure that different people in your organization are aligned and know where you're going. You need to make sure that people at different roles or levels of your hierarchy are going to get different things out of it. You need to know what they're going to get out of it. You can't just say, we're going to implement this thing and, all of our lives are just going to magically turn around. That doesn't happen. And so just like with any kind of software deployment, you need to know what you want and how you're going to, and that'll indicate how you're going to get there. Specific to data, of course, missing data. The data is always missing or bad. You'll have phone numbers which are, don't have an extra zero at the end or some stupidity. If you've got, as part of your process, like so many of you all did, the copying of data from paper to a computer, there's going to be data entry errors. You're going to have to deal with that at the data entry, at the time of data entry, where you can put in validations on the form and make sure that, a PIN code has 6 digits and not 7. But you're also going to want to keep checking and validating as the data flows through your pipeline all the way up to your dashboards. Because errors, you catch as many as you can, as close to the beginning of your pipeline as you can, but don't blindly trust that everything is going to be hunky-dory from there on. Authenticity refers to when data comes into the system, did it come from somebody who was supposed to have put it there, or did you have a public Google form and somebody shared the link and then some teenagers went and filled them up? I mean, this could happen with hopefully not to anybody here, but if a system is not sufficiently well planned, taking these things into consideration, then you do run the risk of bad data entering, and then getting it out later could potentially be a nightmare. I mean, what if somebody put in phone numbers and they passed all the validation checks, but now they put in their neighbor's phone number and you're going to start calling them? There were challenges with regard to merging multiple sources of data. And there are different challenges over here. One is, of course, synchronizing these merges, because you'll do a copy and then you do another copy, but your first copy might have failed and your second copy depended on the first copy succeeding. And so either you're going to get junk or the second copy will also fail, and now everything has failed. You need to be able to do retries. If you've got timestamps on your data, like the date of form collection or whatever, we need to make sure your time zones line up. And there's whenever your data coming from different systems always implicitly carries the assumptions that those different systems made. So one system might have assumed you take your first name and last name and you concatenate them with the first name first. The second one will do last name, comma, first name, and you put them together, and now your records are not lining up. And you've got one record for Rohit Chatterjee and one record for Chatterjee, comma, Rohit, and now you've got a huge headache on your hands. These are not things which you can easily, you can't auto-detect a lot of errors, although AI is going to solve all our problems for us. But you can automate the fixing of these errors. So if you anticipate things going wrong, you can encode in your pipeline logic how you're going to fix them so that things get lined up. And this is, this should be done at implementation time, and you should definitely write all your transformation tests so that you catch them before the system is rolled out. Once the system is rolled out, bugs are much worse in production than they are at project implementation time. Role-based access. You do want a system which will give you role-based access if that's what you need, and you always need this. even if you don't need it at the beginning, as soon as you grow, you're going to need it. As soon as some kind of sensitive data comes in, you're going to need it. As soon as a funder needs to see a report and you want to hide PII data from them and just give them aggregates, you're going to need this. So you should plan for it from the beginning, because it's not always the case that you can throw it on later. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can, and you can just say, hide this table from, these people. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need to give them the table, but not this column. Sometimes you'll give them that column, but except for certain rows. So it's not, so it has to be planned. Role-based access can be difficult. And then, of course, finally, the problem of large data sets, which is not as much of a problem as it used to be, because there's software these days that handles large data sets. But handling a large data set does not necessarily mean handling it in the way that you want. So if you've got 8 gigabytes of data that has to be copied over, it'll be copied over according to the speed of the network between the source and the destination. There's no getting around that. You can, you'll implement software which, spaces it out and retries when there are errors in the middle and is able to, stop, be interrupted and then resume where it left off. But copying 9 GB is going to be copying 9 GB. And processing 9 GB is going to be even harder. And once it's in a table and you're starting to do SQL on it, then your database, your DBMS is going to be, stressed. And so you might have to upgrade your database because it's not big enough to do these joins and your group bys and your pivot tables. So the software exists, but it might cost money. And when you don't want to spend that money, because really, seriously, why should you? There are sometimes ways around that but those require kind of computer science-y solutions. So you can break up the data sets and do, incremental processing and then put them together, but then you have to be clever. And so there's going to be a trade-off. You can always do things easily if you're willing to spend the money, but for most of us who have budgets, you might at some point have to employ brain power or hire brain power, because you don't really want to hire that brain power full time. But if you hire a consultant, like a database consultant, then you can get around some of these problems which come up with scale.
Sure. And I think there's some very interesting questions also in the chat box, and we definitely should take one of them. We'll come to that. I think, Rohit, you have a little bit on solutions, and definitely we did discuss a few and what we should keep in mind to do all of these things. But again, it is yes, over to you, please.
Okay. So I think this is we're coming towards the end of the presentation, and I'm looking forward to jumping into the questions. I see 12 messages in the chat. So when doing a migration, or if it's not a migration, adoption of an open source system, again, the good news is that there's most of what you have to pay attention to is for any software deployment. And it's what even the private sector has to pay attention to. So this is good because you don't want to hit specialized problems. You want to hit problems which people know about and have solved for before. So certainly before you get started, you want to know what you already have. And these are your config files or your .inis or whatever it is. You want to have your list of users. You want to have all this backed up, all the data you have, because during migration, it might just be deleted. And I actually, this was 3 years ago, I was running a fundraising platform, and I decided that I wanted to hire a database vendor because I thought surely they know more about this than I do, and I want to hire, professionalize, etc. And I hired them, and on the first week they deleted my database, and they deleted it in the middle of the day while we were running And this was a fundraising outfit, and we had 150 fundraisers out on the street, and they called and said, Rohit, the system is not working. And these guys had deleted the database. And I said, well, what am I going to do? He said, you have a backup. I said, yes, but the backup is from last night. We were 6 hours into the day. What am I going to do? So that was hell. Okay, so that's
What
just
did
a
you
little horror
do?
story for y'all.
I mean,
I went through the application logs, and I
okay.
pulled the data out of the logs and populated the tables. It was not fun.
Okay. All right. So we
Yeah.
did find a solution. Yes, and maybe the four solutions and what everyone should take away from this call.
Sorry, say that again. What should everyone take away from this call? Yes. So absolutely, you write everything down. Trust nobody. Back up, and things might still go wrong. And if things go wrong, tell your users to be prepared for that. Because people hate it when things when their computers stop working, but they really hate it when they're not expecting it. So if there are IT people on this call, then absolutely always tell your users that something is happening before you do it. And don't, if something's supposed to take 5 minutes, tell them it'll take 30, because you don't know. As with any software, you want to do user training. You want to make sure different people know how to use the part of the system that they're supposed to, especially the stuff they're supposed to use on a daily basis. You want to make sure that if they get stuck, they know who to go to. If they have to call a help desk, or if you're putting up a documentation websites are great, training videos are great. You want to make sure your users are not stuck. If a vendor is doing this for you, make sure that the vendor is going to support you for maybe a month after the handover, because that's when everything is going to go wrong. And most vendors just build that into a contract. Just make sure it's there, because it's the extra money, but you're going to need that. It's like insurance. You might not need it, but when you do need it, you want to make sure it's there. And of course, for after the vendor leaves and the handover is done, but you're in regular run, you want to make sure there are online resources, blog posts, videos, Q&As, user forums, because at some point somebody is going to get stuck, and how do I add this field to this form, and why isn't this thing syncing? And if you do a little Google search or ask ChatGPT, you should be able to get a response, because most of the time you are not the only person who hit this problem.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rohit. And I've just put it in the group chat. We'd love to take questions from the audience, especially, maybe to solve for one problem and why you're here. So let's probably start with Kiran's question, and I'll go from there. Uh, I think it's very relevant. So she asks, under what circumstance must an NGO explore an open source solution? And she also mentions that, you've said a lot about it's niche, it's expensive, you need technology, you need infra and long turnaround time. So a question is, why aren't you then talking about no code, low code, little to no responsibility managing the platform, quick time turnaround, and typically more economical?
Well, the main reason is that you is the if you need customization, or if you need to insure yourself against the company going belly up, you're not going to run your own email service. You're not going to run your own Google Drive. We absolutely trust Google and Microsoft to do those for us, because they do a fantastic job, and they do it very cost effectively, and nobody even thinks about running their own. But if it's the kind of thing which is from a smaller company, and they may not have been around forever, or if you don't trust that they'll stick to the pricing plan which you're subscribed for. I've heard cases, these are not that common, but they do happen, where a company will jack up its prices, and then you kind of have to really make a hard decision. This usually doesn't happen, because a competitive market will keep that from happening. But but it does. If there aren't a lot of players, or if your data is locked in, then you can't, then you don't have a lot of options. Now, if you are using a tool which allows you to export your data in, in a universal format, not in their proprietary format, but if you can download your user list as a CSV or whatever, then that is, then that's a big advantage for you, and you can absolutely work that into your decision-making process. You do want to use tools where you can get to your data, and if that tool is cheaper and you think it's easier to use, then absolutely go for it. I can't comment so much on no-code, low-code, because it's not the case. So I don't know if what the no-code, low-code solutions look like for open source. I can think of the ETL tool called Airbyte, which we use, which is open source and does no-code, low-code. But it's not true that open source is distinct from no-code, low-code. So if you can find an open source solution which gives you those things, great. If you can't, then you weigh your pros and cons. You shouldn't be religious about it. You should find the tool which works for you, for your budget, for your people, and just keep in mind that you want to insulate yourself from the company going bankrupt and stuff like that. If you can export your data, fantastic.
Sure. Kiran, do you want to comment on this or any follow-up to that, or can I move to the next question?
I don't know if I have like a full-on follow-up or a comment. I think, see, the tool that we use is Airtable, right? So that's the primary tool that we use, and we have we've used Softer, which is basically the front end of Airtable, right? So that's how, and we're able to customize it pretty well. We haven't hit any roadblocks in terms of, okay, we can't do this. It's been a lot of, hey, this is what you can do, and let's do some jugaad to make it work, right? So it's been trying to meet our SOPs with what's possible on the tool. What we have found, though, is that it's significantly cheap from any other platform that.
I can't hear him anymore.
Just from an
Can you hear
annual
him?
cost
Sorry, Kiran,
perspective, and then from
can't hear you.
He said it's significantly, I think he said cheaper, and then it started to break up.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I hope you can hear me better now.
Yes.
So it has been significantly more economical, not just from the platform or the vendor perspective, but also from the technological capacity within the organization itself. So that's the reason why, and the reason why I joined this call is because I wanted to, because I don't want to get stuck in the rut of saying, hey, no code is the way for us to go. I want to continue exploring these, right? And saying, well, like why have we made the decisions we've made, and maybe pivot if it requires it. So hence my question, sort of the perspective I'm coming from. Right?
Yes, Kiran, could you also put in the tool you just spoke about so other people can also take a look at it, and it will be a nice cross-learning example of our little webinar. That would be great.
Sure.
Awesome. Yes, Jyoti, please come in, and happy for you to ask Rohit your question.
Yeah, hey, hi Rohit and Sharon, fantastic session. It is really eye-opening to see that there are so many people like me who are kind of lost in between the decision-making of whether tech is good or should we continue with what we have right now, etc. I'll just give you a 20-second brief about my position right now. So we are an organization called Youth for Jobs, and we've recently created a very large platform for persons with disabilities. It's more like a Naukri, but it's, of course, has much more features with respect to disability and how they can access the platform. Having said that, we chose the way of creating the platform using code, and it is quite, it's there's a good database, there's AWS, and there are different aspects to it. But we noticed that the maintenance of such a platform is costing us a lot more. We've invested a lot in building it, and the maintenance of it is a lot more. So every feature, which even though we know will add a lot of value to the community itself, we are having to kind of weigh it on a balance scale and say, hey, do we need this or can we skip it? So I just want to understand that even though we know that open source is not free, like how you mentioned, do you think that the strategy of the organization should be towards moving towards open source so that the license costs can be saved, but at the same time use your program like the practical CXO one, so that we can have someone who's guiding us in that direction?
So if I understood your question, Jyoti, you guys have put together a platform by yourselves. You built your own platform, and now that's getting expensive to enhance and to maintain.
Yes.
So right, building a software platform is always more expensive than you think. And if you had asked me this when you all started the thing, I would have tried to dissuade you. Because really, building software is, the software people make it sound like it's so easy and, oh, look, something AWS, click a database, click a button, but it's not. And most organizations should not build. They should always choose to, buy or rent or download somebody else's project and run it. Now that you, of course, you've sunk your cost, you want to know whether you should continue or whether you should move away. And that's not a question I'm going to answer over a webinar, because somebody really has to, has to do an analysis and think about it. Would a Tech4Dev fractional CXO be equipped to do that analysis and make a recommendation? Absolutely. I'm sure one of them would. But I can't say anything right now.
And I'm really
and if you do move away, it's really not, should you move to open source or should you move to something else? I've told you pros and cons of open source, and you'll weigh that, and you'll, if you were to move away, you would want to move to the best possible solution, whatever that is.
Sure. And I think, already, we have 3 small little connections forming here. Thank you, Anita. That would be great if you and Jyoti could connect, and if you could look at the CXO program some more, any more. I think we do have a few. Maybe I can call. Jesh, I think we've covered this about best software tools for NGOs to collect and manage project activity data. I think we have touched upon a bit, but maybe Rohit, you want to take that one?
So the ones which I've come across are the ones which our clients use, which are Avni, Kobo Toolbox, Comcare, Survey CTO. For collection, most of them throw in reporting as well, which I think is what you mean by managing, because you don't actually have to do database management. They do that part for you. And if it's your sole collection tool, you can probably stick with the reporting facilities provided. You want to, make sure you can create the reports that you want to create, and you want to make sure that you have, the other features that you need, like your scheduled reporting and your role-based access, etc. But if they don't have them, it's not terrible. You can always pull the data out into another database and hook it up to a Looker Studio or a Metabase or a superset and do your reporting over there. So it's not terrible. You do need to make sure that you can pull the data out, though, and you want to be able to do that programmatically so that somebody isn't clicking buttons on Sunday night.
Right.
But the tools that I mentioned just now do, and any respectable software will.
Jesh, did that answer your question? Do you want to come in here?
Thank you so much.
Great. Amazing. Jeevan, do you want to ask your question, and maybe then Rohit could answer?
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. So my question is, do you have any softwares which track finance data on a live basis, especially when we do some travel or any expenses? It gets settled. When we settle it, it gets updated automatically. Currently, it's being done manually in many organizations. So I want to, and it also has an impact on project management, because the project lead gets to know how much money is being spent a bit late. There's a gap that happens. So to get a live information, do we have any easy, not easy, but affordable systems to use?
Easy, quick, and affordable, Rohit.
That's what everyone wants, right? So all I can think of, and this is not something that I know about, so you would probably have to double check this, but I believe that ERP Next and the things, which is built on Frappe, ERP Next has modules for this, for expenses, for reconciliation, for reimbursements. I think so. If not, then I don't know. Zoho, I don't know.
I think, sorry. I think, Kiran, you wanted to add something, and also,
Yeah.
Jeevan, sorry, Kiran, 1 second before I forget.
Sure.
Sahil mentions Razorpay payroll is an option for this. And yes, over to you, Kiran.
Hi. So just as an example of how we used Airtable, I guess, is we can track from a fund request level when someone makes a fund request. When that fund request is made, it goes into approvals. We've tagged Airtable, or we've integrated Airtable to Slack, which means our manager immediately gets a notification saying, hey, look, so-and-so has made such and such a fund request. You can go open the fund request. You can see the bills or the budget or whatever, and you can approve. And once that happens, the account team pays out. Now, this has a benefit on the other side as well. When money flows in, say from a CSR partner, we can tag every single line item to that partner, right? And what this allows us to do is pretty robust reporting, right? And definitely our auditor is grateful for this. But we're also able to show live finances to our partners. And so what that means is, yes, it's not audited, but that level of transparency and accountability just skyrockets, right? So that's what we've been able to do with Airtable, again, and Softer. And that's actually the primary reason why we moved to Airtable, was because we could do this.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Kiran.
Very nice. I will add on to that, though, that Kiran made it sound like Airtable is doing all the work, but I'm also sure that Kiran and his team had to do some, good planning, good design, and figure out that workflow.
Yeah.
And both the computer part of it as well as the human part of it, telling the finance team to watch Slack and click on the thing. So there's a whole solution there, which sounds like it was very well done.
And a good example of, what we've been saying through the webinar. So yes. So last question, Rohit, and maybe I can ask Meera to come in here. And if we extend maybe 5 minutes for those of you who have other commitments, sincere thanks for joining and for being part of this discussion. We were very surprised. We had more than 200 participants, and for most of the session today, we had 90 quite active. So thank you very much. Makes us believe that we need to do a lot more of this. And yes, Meera, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. It was definitely very informative. We are a non-profit. We work with high schoolers in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade in Karnataka and we work with them towards career success. Now the problem itself, where we thought we wanted to go full on with open source, pretty much. We thought that was pretty much the answer to all our tech needs, and we have many, and they keep growing. But we thought we'll start with a very small module, which is not even mission critical in terms of our operation. But we ran into so many issues. I know, even straight from, understanding, whether the tool fitted all our requirements, to, seeing, everything was a customization. And it went off into a spiral, and we literally had to drop the whole thing. So then I think it really became a pain point for us that without someone with a tech knowledge inside who can understand what is happening, I know even in open source, even though it was open source, it didn't work at all for us. So how do we work it out? And definitely, while we do have a pipeline of tech needs, we may not be in a position to have someone who works with us full time on that path.
Right. So it sounds like the vendor was the type of vendor who was being expected to do what you told them to do, but was not the type of vendor who could create the solution. And that's, I mean, reading your message in the chat, that's what it sounds like to me. So what you all were missing was the solution engineer or whatever. And you would need that type of person, regardless of the tool that you were going to implement, whether it was closed source or something for Microsoft or SAP or whoever, because you need somebody to figure out your processes, how people work, how the data moves, what the data is, where is it coming from. When somebody does this, then something else should happen. And somebody really has to create this big picture in their head before even choosing the tool. You should not do tool selection until you know what it is that you need. And of course, it sounds very obvious when I say it that way, but in reality, we've all, bought something which didn't do what it was supposed to do for us.
And it's data in
You need
general.
that person. Data in general, or even, even in the kitchen, you buy, the wrong blender and it doesn't, you need to know what you need before you go and start investing. And sometimes this is a long process. It might be a few months. And if you hire a consultant, certainly if you hire somebody from Tech4Dev, they will spend a couple months just talking to people, just talking. And you might say, hey, when are we going to see something? And they're like, no, we're still talking. But you have to do that, because once you start getting into the actual implementation, then it's harder to back out. I will tell you though, Meera, that your experience is not that uncommon. So please don't be embarrassed or anything. It does happen a lot. It used to happen more, but people are getting better these days. But it still happens where you do an implementation, a software implementation, and it just falls apart halfway through. It might be a software implementation or any kind of project, even data projects. I remember 10 years ago, 70% of data projects would fail. I thought, what? 70? And today it's better. Today, I think 40% is the last statistic I heard. But projects fail, and then you get burnt, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to do this again. But you can't, because you have to do it again. You just have to do it better the next time.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Rohit, for doing this. Like I told you before our session, it's just talking about our everyday and what people should keep in mind. But I think these are quite, these short form, just conversations do make a little bit of a difference in, how we think about things. So yes, thank you to everybody. We also, who are still here, just to tell you, we're also doing a series of webinars starting from next week with the service CTO as well on data collection, quality of data, how to work in fields with field teams. So hope to see all of you on more of these conversations. And please get in touch with Rohit for all your tech issues. I'm sure he'll be able to help with that.
Absolutely, yes. Thank
Right.
you so much, Sharon, for having me. It was a great webinar and so wonderfully organized. And I'm so impressed that Zoom didn't conk out on us halfway through.
Thank God. Well, let's not jinx it. But yes, thank you, Rohit. And thanks, everyone. Have a great evening and see all of you soon.
Bye-bye.